Hello, welcome to another episode of In Your Corner. With formal session wrapping up on July 31st, I'm already looking ahead to the fall in anticipation of initiatives to make government work better for the Plymouth-Barnstable District. To that end, I'm very excited to say we are joined by State Auditor Suzanne Bump. Auditor Bump is the 25th auditor of the Commonwealth and the first woman to serve in this role, taking office in 2011. She leads a 225-person workforce of auditors, fraud investigators, and researchers to improve government accountability and build trust in government. Her prior government experience includes service as the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development and as a state representative. The state auditor serves as the Chief Accountability Officer for Massachusetts state government and its residents. Their office conducts audits of state entities and contractors to assess their performance and recommend improvements to make government work better. Since 2011, the Office of the State Auditor has identified over $1.4 billion with a B in improper or questionable spending and missed savings opportunities in the Commonwealth. Welcome again, Auditor Bump.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, Senator.
It's really important, I think, for folks to have a good understanding of the fundamentals and importance of your position. I think that when people think about the Office of the State Auditor, many assume that you do financial auditing of individuals, which is not the case.
No.
Instead, you do something called performance auditing. Can you tell us what that is and how you do it?
Sure. I really appreciate this opportunity to provide a little bit of a civics lesson, which is really what this is. So you're right. We don't do financial auditing. We do what's called performance auditing. And that means we use financial and other kinds of data that agencies collect in order to determine, yes, how much they spent, but also how they spent it. One of the questions we ask is, did you spend it in accordance with the law? For instance, did you spend it only in pursuit of your agency's mission, or did you kind of go off track? Could you do it more efficiently or more effectively? Those are the kinds of questions that we ask when we are doing audits of state agencies and state contractors.
You know, it strikes me that taxpayers will really be happy to hear that their funding, the dollars that they put into their into taxes, is really well monitored and cared for. So not only looking at efficiencies, but good completion, good follow-through.
Right.
What are the, I really appreciate your website, which I have to mention because there's a ton of information on there. And there's also information about what you're doing sort of moment to moment. So you not only have such a big staff that you supervise in looking at various areas of the Commonwealth, but you keep apprised of current events. And so I'm wondering if you can give a couple of examples of impactful auditing measures that you have overseen.
Well, there are numerous examples that we could give. I'm going to go back because this, to me personally, was the most impactful audit that we did. It goes back a few years, and it was impactful not in a financial sense. Sometimes our audits do have financial impact because we tell an agency that they are misspending because they're not following the rule, they're not overseeing a contractor properly. But in this case, it was an audit of the Department of Children and Families. And the problem was that kids in foster care who get enrolled in the state's mass health program, the Medicaid program, were not having having all of their health information available to the social workers that are overseeing them. If you're in state custody, you're assigned a social worker. That social worker is to ensure that you are healthy and safe. The social workers did not have access to the data, the information about hospitalizations or doctor's visits that kids in foster care were receiving, and so they were missing. We found they were missing the hospitalizations, not for scraped knees or for cold and flu, but for stabbings, for sexual abuse, for suicide attempts, for cutting, for other kinds forms of assault, and so making them aware of the fact that this information is there and that one agency should be connecting with the other agency to make this information available so that kids were better protected while in state custody was the most impactful audit that I personally feel that we have done. It met with a lot of resistance initially from the governor's office. They really felt that they had all the bases covered, but eventually they agreed with our recommendation, and they are now doing that.
I am so impressed with that work because my background is in childcare before I became a lawyer, before I went into office. So I know what it's like for families who are having a challenge. Their kids are with an agency overseeing them. And for part of the auditor's job to be sort of an overseer to make sure that people who are working as best they can in the system, but maybe really close, really busy, you need someone that is removed and familiar with the way the process is set up to run and really can see those efficiencies. My child care bill, it's at commonstartma.org. It just really intersects nicely with all the points that you're making.
Right.
And then coming out of COVID, those challenges that were interspersed. So without your position in looking at what agencies are doing, then there wouldn't be, I think, a path to improvement and to more efficiencies. And in fact, that leads me to my next point. When people say that your office makes government work better, it's really a lot about being familiar with the way agencies need to run.
Right.
And your background fits so well with that.
Well, you're right. I started out at a young age, in my 20s, as a state legislator. I started as an aide, and then I ran successfully to succeed my employer, the former state representative Elizabeth Mateer. It's a long time ago. And I was out of government for a long time, became a lawyer myself, worked in and around Beacon Hill, but then came back during the Patrick administration to be Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development. And it was that experience, experiencing my own frustration with the fact that agencies are not allowing sister agencies to access their data so that they can all get better insight into what the results of their work is, because a lot of agencies have overlapping missions. You think of how many agencies serve kids. It's not even just DCF and the Mass Health Program. There's early education and care, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
So you want agencies to be in collaboration. You want them to be doing this data sharing. And so that's part of our mission, is to help agencies appreciate the ways that data can better inform their activities and affect their outcomes, and how data sharing can lead to better results overall in state government.
And that's so efficient for the taxpayer too, and it saves time, and it brings help to folks more quickly.
Right.
One of the things I'm so interested in terms of your position is you have to stay really objective.
Oh, that is the chief quality. So when we conduct these audits, we do so according to government standards. The federal government sets the standards for how you do both financial auditing and performance auditing, and many of the processes that we use are indeed intended to ensure objectivity, independence, thoroughness and accuracy, so that any other person who went in and looked at how we did our audit would come to the same conclusions. And it is that requires a great deal of terrific emphasis by the auditor on professionalism within the office, training, adherence to those standards, because without that, the office has no credibility. It gets seen as a political instrument, and sure, you're elected to this position, but once you're there, politics is supposed to be set aside. You don't. It's all in the numbers. It's all in the data. You set aside your political views on things
And agendas.
Yeah.
You can't have a particular drive on one issue that maybe leaves short the myriad of things
Right.
That you're working on. When I look today about where we've come over the years, I think that it's that objective leadership that leads to the trust, where people feel confident in your results.
Right.
And there are comparisons that I make just in knowing the treasurer. And I know you both have really reached out in your career and received, leadership positions and kind of awards with respect to your work. And I know it's always
Right.
tough to talk about yourself, but let me do it in the context of what would you say in terms of the achievements that you have initiated personally as a leader? Which of those most informed your work over the years?
Well, we have received a lot of recognition.
I love how you say we. I have to interrupt you because it's the team that you lead.
Right. I'm not doing this work.
Right.
I'm setting the agenda. But so we received a great deal of recognition a number of years ago for the work that we initiated in the Mass Health, the Medicaid program. Medicaid is a joint federal-state program, and the Government Accountability Office, which is the accountability arm of Congress, identified years ago the Medicaid program as having a high rate of misspending. Some of it's fraud, some of it's inefficiencies. At any rate, so we, because of the data analytic capabilities that I brought to the office, broke a lot of ground in finding inefficiencies in the Mass Health program. We have won awards for the work that we have done, which now other states are doing. They too have followed our lead and invested in data analytic technologies, and they've partnered with other federal agencies, as we have, in order to get a better understanding of how the program operates and how it should operate better. And by virtue of that work, I sit on the domestic working group of the United States Comptroller. It's because of the leadership that we have shown in Massachusetts. So it's really it really has been a pretty heady experience over the past 11 and a half years to lead this agency into, frankly, a higher level of function and contribution, but a lot of that has to do with the introduction of new technologies so that we get these insights.
Well, I think that's true, but you have to recognize and have the motivation. So you have led the office in Massachusetts being recognized as a lead. Right. So, when you look at the importance in the, really having a hand in making things, helping taxpayers nationally. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And then I'm thinking about, for the offices that you are reviewing, when you kind of get that phone call, okay, the auditor is coming to do the process. Do people run screaming? I mean, and how do you
it depends on the
how
agency.
do you deal with that in terms of what do you tell your staff and what is that process like?
Well, there is a certain tone that you need to bring, and you clearly need to have cooperative relationships with other agencies in government, because under the law, we audit some aspect of every agency's operations every 3 years. So, so it's never the first time that the auditor has shown up, and how you are greeted in the present moment has a lot to do with how you treated the auditee in the past. But if they know that this is not about finding a gotcha moment or scapegoating an individual, and it really is, what do the facts show, and you use the audits, as I say frequently, you use the audits as tools to make government work better, not weapons to score political points or bring somebody down. And so that leads to a much more collaborative and cooperative process with an auditee.
Well, I've seen that in your work, and I also think that when you have a team in government, there's often times that you don't really have experience with the general public, and so I know there have been instances when you've been able to, kind of lift up and really compliment certain processes and work that folks have done.
Right.
Do you have a memory about any particular instance like that?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, the relevance of our work, and that is because we in the auditor's office get to decide what it is that we're going to audit. We use a number of factors to determine within, for instance, the Department of Public Health, which of the many activities that they carry out are we going to focus on at any given time. And so we look at a number of factors, and some of it is, strictly speaking, the numbers. Gee, does there seem to be an unusual heavy amount of a type of spending that didn't occur in the past, so it had something varied from the norm. But also, we do try to be relevant. So if the public is concerned about the way a particular agency is operating, or if we know that the legislature has an interest in this, and that an objective analysis of how a program is working could help you in your decision making, then that's what we will audit. So that's it. It's that freedom to determine ourselves what it is that we're going to audit that allows the agency to my agency to be relevant, and to and to help problem solve on an ongoing basis in state government.
Wow, that means you're also constantly morphing and upgrading and changing.
Right.
And do you have inquiries from the general public ever, or do you have what sort of, are there ever other folks in government who come to you?
We have initiated audits really at the suggestion of the legislature, and also indeed citizens have given us ideas. We have a hotline and a website where you can submit a concern, a suggestion for an audit. And we do have outreach within the office so that we sit down with a number of the advocacy organizations that that come to the legislature because they're concerned about how an agency is functioning, and learn from them as consumers of state of state services. We learn from them as to what seems to be functioning poorly, what isn't producing a good outcome.
And the other thing is, with such a, I think I learned something like 225 folks are within your
Right.
department. How does that break down? And as the sort of the experts on efficiency and good economical spending, how does that work within your department?
Well, of the 225, only about half of them actually are auditors. We have the administrative staff, but we also have a couple of other functions. We have the Bureau of Special Investigations, which partners with agencies like the Department of Transitional Assistance, like Mass Health, and investigates individual cases of suspected fraud. Folks are getting some sort of state benefit, and maybe they really aren't entitled to it. Maybe they weren't in the beginning, maybe they aren't now, because their financial circumstances may change, and they haven't reported that to the government. So we have a group of people that are doing that. Then we also have a unit called the Division of Local Mandates, and they really, they are kind of the advocates. We're actually advocates for local governments because sometimes the legislature will pass a law and it requires municipalities to undertake a new activity. Early voting is an example of that. And under the law, certain requirements that are imposed by state government have to be paid for by state government and not by local taxpayers. And so when there's a question, we come in and make the legal analysis as to who's responsible to pay, and then we do the financial analysis to tell the legislature, okay, you got to come up with this much more money. And we have done that with early voting. For instance, but we have done it in a number of different areas. And in addition to making those legal determinations, we also do investigative. We do other reports. We do deep dives into other programs that are state, local, jointly operated. So Chapter 90, so-called, is the way we deliver aid to cities and towns for road repair, bridge building. I used to live, for a time, I lived in the Berkshires. I see the east-west divide, and the formula by which the Chapter 90 funds are distributed amongst the cities and towns.
Or the Cape?
Or, yes. Well, particularly your less populated areas.
Right.
Less populated areas have needs as well, but the way that the aid is distributed has really disadvantaged them, and the less populated areas don't have the economic growth. They're not bringing in more revenue so that they can do this work. In some cases, their revenues are falling, while in other urban areas, revenues are growing. So bringing attention to the fact that formula needs to be updated, which it hasn't been in many years, is a service to local taxpayers, and so that's the kind of partnership that we have with local government in that office. So we actually serve. Auditing is mostly what we do, but we have a number of specific responsibilities assigned to us by the laws.
Wow, it's so broad. As you kind of move to the next piece of your career, and you look at sort of everything that you've accomplished, and I think it's really hard when you're still in it and doing so much as you continue to do. But what would you say, are the really the important qualities of leadership here, and the way you fit with other areas of the government? Just what does it take?
Well, I think that it does take a certain skill set. I came to this position with an inquiring mind. You've got to have an open mind. You've got to be willing to have your mind changed when the data doesn't support your initial thoughts. about something. To have a knowledge of how government works is extraordinarily helpful. I would not, frankly, to the extent that I've been successful, it's because I knew how government worked from having been in an executive position. So you know how things are done versus how they should be done versus how they could be done. So you have an understanding of that. But then also to the point that I made a moment ago in response to your question, it's also what your mindset is. Not to be prejudging, not to have a political agenda, but to be dedicated to the work of the office and to use audits as tools to make government work better, not weapons to score political points or bring somebody down.
That is just such good advice for so many things. I want to really thank you so much for being here. This has not only been interesting and educational, but I feel like there's been an opportunity for me to understand how hard people in government work to make it better, especially under your leadership.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment to myself and my staff. It has been such an honor and a privilege to have served in this role for the past 11 and a half years. Come January, you will be swearing in a new auditor.
Auditor Bump, thank you again for joining me today. I know the people watching from home will be leaving this conversation with a better understanding of the management and accountability of the state's finances. As always, my office remains an open resource for anyone who may need assistance. We can be reached by phone at 617-722-1330 or by emailing me at susan.moran@masenate.gov. Thank you all for watching today. I'm Senator Moran, and I'll be in your corner.